The Business of AI podcast, exploring how businesses are using AI to build services and tools, transforming organisations and delighting consumers. Produced by UKAI and hosted by Tim Flagg. AI is our business.
Welcome to another episode of the Business of AI podcast. And I'm delighted to be welcomed Sam from Fern AI this morning. So Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Tim. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And let's get started by finding out a bit more about you. So could you tell us your background and how you ended up starting Fern AI?
Absolutely. So I've worked in various data and AI systems integrators for the last 15 years, which has been fascinating. I've been through various different, let's call them hype cycles, but trends as well. Probably starting with the emergence of public cloud and big data, but then into more kind of self-serve analytics. And more recently into AI. The last 5 years, I've been working deeply in AI engineering and helping companies scale AI, very closely linked to Google Cloud as a hyperscaler. And I've become fascinated with the commercials and economics around AI, how companies can actually use AI to gain a competitive advantage and create commercial gains. Which led me to starting Fern AI, because I actually think it's a challenge that needs to be solved and has not yet been solved. So I started Fern AI to actually focus on, I guess, the commercial and economic side of how AI kind of creates value for customers.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into some of that detail, because this is one of the biggest questions that we hear out there at the moment, which is both businesses and the public sector, the government funded bodies across the UK, they're looking at AI and saying, well, this has the potential to drive lots of productivity, lots of efficiency, to save lots of money. But the question is how? And I think, not just how, but as you've kind of linked this back to ROI, that is the key metric, isn't it, in businesses, where they actually want to know that they're getting the return. And unless we can answer that question, there's going to be so much, I think, skepticism. We're already starting to see that in some organizations where, they've tried a little bit of, in quotation marks, AI, maybe not the right AI, but they tried a little bit of AI, hasn't yielded what they wanted. And now it's sort of come back. And it's that sometimes the people in organizations who signed off the budget, maybe the CFO, that sort of role in organizations, now a bit more sort of skeptical about it. But what would you sort of add to that in terms of like the broader picture that you're seeing about how AI is being adopted across the UK?
So the challenge with that at the moment is that AI, in terms of like the outcomes that it will produce, have been to this point and still are relatively hypothetical. However, the cost of AI is factual, in that at the end of the month or end of the quarter, you will receive an invoice from various different hyperscalers showing you what you spent. So there's it's a challenge that needs to be solved to work out how we can create that, or turn that hypothesis into more evidence-based observability about those returns. I think for a long time, until now, probably in the last 18 months, AI was an innovation that companies did alongside just general modernization and moving workloads to the cloud and getting data more in the hands of different domains within their businesses. And any competitive gains that companies could get was kind of an initiative alongside many other initiatives as well. Now that it's front and center, the demand has skyrocketed, which means that the cost has skyrocketed. And I think the challenge for CFOs and businesses is that hypothetical outcomes are no longer reasonable as in terms of justification, at least to keep justifying the level of spend that's going into it.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges I think right now is that not only within the business, but also the external sort of factors are affecting this as well. So you've seen with the cost of tokens that Claude, for example, used to be
Yeah.
very generous with the amount you could get from them. And then suddenly, presumably in their organization, someone's saying, hang on, we're not profitable or not profitable enough, even though a multi-billion-dollar company, but they're trying to sort of prepare for their IPO, and they're sort of saying, well,
Yes.
we need to make sure we're giving less tokens and for charging more money.
Yes.
So that has a knock-on effect then on businesses. So you're right. The immediate thing which a business will see will be the higher costs coming in, but then those results aren't coming in to justify those costs yet. So how do you balance those two things?
So how do you balance those two things? I think, and it might sound really simple, but businesses, large and small, and everyone in between, should and could spend more time on going deeper into the qualification and the debating and the discovery side of setting up on the right path with AI. The thing about AI is, and particularly from the world I came from, which was less working with things like Claude and just being able to connect it to things and just go and prompt it. It was more what I'd class as sort of enterprise AI, building an AI platform that can scale, deploying models at scale, building the cold ML workflow that goes behind it. I think organizations can just go deeper into what outcome are they looking for from AI, because that is the whole purpose. The whole purpose is to create an outcome, and that can be many different things. But if you haven't gone deep into what is that outcome, how do we quantify that outcome in terms of a positive impact for our company, then you will end up just doing things and not being able to evidence what they have actually been, or what those things have actually contributed to your organization. So there's a bigger upfront part that I think companies should be looking into. Once you've done that process of, let's call it ideation through to prioritization and filtering out ideas that probably aren't going to have a positive impact on your organization, setting up tracking through pilot and into implementation. What I found working in my previous roles is that is an afterthought. So a business case will be produced, an initiative will go into a pilot. This could be a big transformational initiative. And then at some point later on down the line, could be 6-9 months, a CIO or a CFO comes knocking and says, I'm not seeing the returns. Can you show me how this is making a difference? And then you're having to almost like knock together some evidence after the fact. Actually, if you set up that tracking and that value tracking in the early stage through pilot, it gives you a lot more evidence to go back and say, this is working, this is not. Should we kill it? Should we pivot? Should we double down on it because it's going even better than we thought it would? And I just think those general governance activities that can be put in place alongside this as well to actually promote more innovation is a kind of a plausible way to attack some of that problem.
Yeah, we often talk about the digital mindset on the podcast. This concept that actually, in order to drive successful transformation, you have to have the culture and the mindset within the organization of being more agile, more resilient, really curious, and have this test and learn approach. And underlining all of that is the data-driven decision making, which is exactly what you've just been talking about there in terms of get the data that allows you to make some objective decisions, and you can evaluate whether things have worked or not. The question I wanted to ask you though, because I agree with what you're saying in terms of trying to measure things and trying to see whether they're successful to be able to then make a business case to go back to the CFO or whoever's signing it off. But we know in the space we're working at the moment that technology is changing so quickly. And not only is technology changing so quickly, there's new vendors, there's new technologies, there's new costs that you referred to before, like what Claude's been doing with those costs. So actually, if you set out some KPIs for even a 6-month, but let alone a 12-month period, how do you ensure that those KPIs are still going to be relevant and there's not going to be other KPIs or metrics by the time you've actually got started?
Well, one, that may well happen, and two, MLOps is quite a big discipline in enterprise AI. And what MLOps is it's kind of setting up the foundations, the ability to deploy AI at scale. But one of the things that companies do, and my previous company did it really well, was kind of set up the ability to look at things like concept drift and data skew. And those were things that post deployment would actually give you triggers to say that this is moving in a different direction of travel to what we've seen for now. So I think that's going to be kind of a standard governance discipline that needs to be put in for people to actually monitor how things change and how things evolve over time, because they are evolving very quickly. The whole purpose of deploying AI for a particular reason or a particular use case might change over 3 months. That's not just the technology, that might be the business evolving itself. So I think it won't have been solved, but it's going to be something that needs to be solved so that companies can wrap a little bit more control around this. Is probably my answer to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And, it comes back to just, I think, admitting sometimes that this space is very, changing so quickly. That's often part of the hard conversation to have with the CFO or the CEO when you're going to organization, because, of course, they love to have those 12-month plans.
Yes.
And maybe it's actually being able to say to them, look, the way that technology, explaining what we've just been talking about, technology is changing. We could lock in for 12 months and measure against those metrics, but if we do, we're probably going to be measuring the wrong thing by the end of it, and we'll have not adequately shown you whether this is delivering value or not. So maybe start off with a shorter period, maybe a quarter, would you say, something like that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the thing is, and I'm not a CFO, so saying this on behalf of CFOs, take it with a pinch of salt. But I don't think CFOs will necessarily be looking for like a direct correlation and reconciliation between the investments in AI and the returns that they get. What I think they do need, which is what I don't think they are seeing, is like a direction of travel or a little bit more observability as to, I've been asked to kind of invest in this and be innovative, and I may have even been tasked with it by my board and my CEO, but I'm also the guardian and the custodian of the balance sheet in this company. So it's fair for me to ask for some kind of observability around the direction of travel of where our AI investments are actually creating positive contributions to my balance sheet. And hopefully in the top line as well, hopefully in growth. That's, I think, what everyone wants to see. There is, like, I am such a pro AI person because it's been what I've lived and breathed for a long time. And I think the potential is huge for the people, for businesses. It's the potential's great. I just think that we need to have more evidence-based outcomes against that potential at the moment. So I think that's what businesses are struggling with. And there are ways to do it. It's not going to be front of mind at the moment, but also I think it might not necessarily leave us in a wonderful place if we're just diving in and doing things and not thinking about actually, our business was here before AI, our business operates in a way that wasn't designed necessarily for AI. Let's think about that as well as what technical innovations are going to enable us.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And in terms of just going back to the point about KPIs, because I'm conscious that you will probably see lots of different businesses with many different types of KPIs and metrics. Could you maybe share a few examples of some of the KPIs that you think are useful for businesses to evaluate this sort of return on investment and this kind of productivity gain?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about productivity gain, and in on its own, creating things like or you putting a metric such as a productivity gain by using Claude for software engineering or product development might not necessarily give you a value-based metric out of it. What it does do is it potentially creates efficiency for you to work on value add based initiatives as well. So if you're able to actually use Claude to work through that product lifecycle quickly, that should in theory leave you more time or more opportunity to tackle sort of value add based activities as well. There's metrics that you can track, such as, I mean, yeah, the software development lifecycle and how you're actually able to kind of commit at more of a regular basis, how you're actually able to resolve things like tickets on Jira at a more regular basis. But that is just giving you productivity metrics. So what I think is businesses need to have in parallel a constant and consistent churn of discovery as to where that efficiency that they've gained from using these tools like Claude can be focused in terms of value add opportunities. And I think that's fantastic because it gives teams and employees more of a chance to kind of work on other things that are making a positive contribution to the top line. And I think it inspires people to continue to be more innovative. I've got this idea of people in companies in the UK being like sort of entrepreneurial and innovative with AI because their companies have enabled them to do so by actually saying your 20% efficiency gain is not just going to stop there. It actually gives you the chance to actually go and find more opportunities to enable outcomes with AI. So in answer to your question, Tim, with kind of like the key metrics, they are very productivity focused at the moment. In terms of more, I don't want to use the word traditional, but more kind of AI as I knew it from a more machine learning and predictive analytics point of view, there's quite clear metrics you can track on use cases such as fraud detection or reducing customer churn or customer propensity to buy for retailers and things like that. Those have more binary outcomes because it's a prediction that's led to an action, and that action may or may not have produced an outcome, which usually has a financial metric at the back of it. So I think that's a little bit easier to track in terms of KPIs.
Yeah. So that's sort of interesting because the metrics which we've set up already for the business and for the individual functions within that business, they're still valid. And what the machine learning or the AI powered tools that we're using are doing is actually doing the work more efficiently to deliver those same KPIs. So actually you'll see the productivity gains in those kind of classic KPIs, if you like. And we shouldn't necessarily be looking for new KPIs along the way. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think it would be fair. I think if you are more efficient through use of agentic and Claude and tools like that, I think there's an indirect link to those maybe more traditional machine learning methods that you could actually say, well, we're able to tackle more of that and create more of that, which is probably a bit more kind of value add and growth focused, because we've got this efficiency from these great innovative tools like Claude and Gemini and the OpenAI stuff as well. So I don't think they should be separated. I think they should be combined, and you should realize that you can do more of that because you're able to get more gains from this.
If you're going to go down that route, I'm starting to sort of realize that might make sense, right, to keep those classic KPIs. But then you come up against this problem of attribution. And my background years ago was in marketing, and you'll know in marketing, attribution is a key thing because you spend all this money on digital channels. It has an impact on the marketing metrics, but you don't know which of those digital channels has had the most impact. Sounds like we've got a similar problem here, in that if we're still measuring those classic metrics for the business, you can see the productivity gain, but actually which bit of the new tools that you've stuck in there, is it the LLM you're using over here? Is it sort of the data that you've cleaned up over here? Is it some of the automated workflows, or add in every other tool you're going to put into that that workflow? So how do you start to evaluate which bit of the new machine learning workflow or AI automation workflow is actually adding the value?
Yeah, it's so this is a very big part of what Fern AI is doing, because there is we're working on things like causal inference and how that can actually be applied, that logic between I did something and I got something out of it, but then there's like 10,000 other things going on that may or may not have affected what we got out of it as well. How you can actually separate those two things. I think there's various different methods that people use. There's Shapley value attribution, which is kind of something from game theory about 60 years ago, and it's a value attribution method that's used in machine learning, but it's potentially something that can actually kind of be used in value attribution in terms of ROI from AI as well, which is almost kind of, we've invested X in this product and we expect to get Y back in terms of business growth, but in terms of that Y, we might only take a 0.6%, 0.6x weighting from it, because there's also this other initiative that's going on in the organization that's not related, but also may have an effect, a concurrent effect on that outcome happening as well. And I've seen organizations do it. The problem is it can be very static. It can sometimes create more problems than outcomes, because you don't want people to argue that their attribution was greater than someone else's and so on. So I think that's an area that is still in research, and yeah, fortunately Fern AI is one of the companies that's looking into that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting and important part of driving AI adoption in organizations, because we already talked about the challenges of trying to deliver that ROI and why businesses are looking at it. But I think you're ahead of the curve here in terms of seeing the next problem, which is going to be, well, once they've figured out how it does deliver ROI, they want to know which bits of that AI tech stack are going to be able to deliver.
Exactly. A CFO will be receiving and signing off on business cases based on AI, but other things as well. Our app needs to be refreshed or something like that. All of those things could have an effect on growth and gains and revenue gains for that company. What the CFO can't do at the end is have all of these different departments who've maybe been working on these concurrent activities that have the same sort of focus outcome, which is we want to grow, we want to acquire more customers and so on. I'm just using an example. They can't have that. They need to be able to quantify those returns against all of the different initiatives that may have caused that, not just one. And that's where I talk about direction of travel. It's not a direct reconciliation, but I think if you can get more of a view on that direction of travel and a bit more evidence-based stuff to support it, I actually think this will grow AI adoption, because it's a little bit more controlled. And what we've seen at the moment is it's a little bit out of control, and that's causing problems for people. When it's out of control, people tend to just stop, and that's not what anyone wants. This can create so much value for so many companies and so many people. So the worst thing would be that it all just kind of came to a standstill because we had no control over it.
Yeah, I think that's critical. That sort of the ability that you're talking about to quantify things and to be able to make that business case and provide the data. That's what we always say, isn't it? Come bring data because it's objective, and it allows that conversation then to move forward. But I want to come back to that concept you mentioned about adoption, because that's really key. That's what we're trying to achieve here. And it's what I hear when I talk to large organizations, small organizations, public sector, even senior civil servants. When I've asked them what their number one challenge is, I'll often say adoption. Essentially, that is, I suppose, building trust within the organization, both from the leadership down to the sort of the everyday employees. Sort of trust, but also usage and some sort of longevity that this whatever the AI tool or service they're trying to build in is going to stick around. So how are you sort of using these metrics that you're gathering and this data? How are you been using it to drive that adoption?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, I don't think in terms of what we're capturing can necessarily directly drive adoption. But I think that will come as Fern AI matures, but also as more organizations think about AI in this more kind of ROI and value attribution way. I think that will have a direct impact on adoption. I think there is a huge demand from British businesses and people within those businesses to actually adopt AI. But I think companies need to do a better job of creating a safe space for them to actually do it and innovate and get things wrong. I read an article the other day about a company or a consultant who had spent, I don't even, it was $500 million on Claude by accident or something like that. And to me, it's just basic kind of 101 governance to put the controls in place so that people can innovate without feeling like they're going to break something that's going to be mission critical or create some, a terrible situation like that. I always described it as a bit, to use an analogy, when you sort of, like I seem to do every weekend, take my children to a playground or something. You want to be able for them to explore in a space and get things wrong, but you want to know that that's almost had its health and safety review, so that they're going to be able to go in there and you're not having to be on top of them and they can kind of go and do what they want. But if they fall off the swing, someone's thought about putting a soft landing for them, that kind of thing. And I think that's what businesses need to do in order to promote adoption, give people the space to innovate, get things wrong that aren't going to create like a mission critical issue. And then gradually over time, I just think this is going to be part of their day-to-day life, actually deploying AI and using AI and thinking of ideas, being creative in their minds and thinking, well, AI can enable that, and that's going to produce an outcome for my employer or for my department or for myself. So I think there's again, historic methods such as building sandboxes and AI playgrounds and factories that have been done. They're just not front of mind at the moment because we're just flying in and getting our hands on these things.
Yeah, I really like that concept of play. So it's a theme that comes up quite a bit when we're talking to businesses or here on the podcast, actually, about it's the most efficient way of learning. And you've got kids as well. And I remember when my kids were younger, and that's how they learn the basics, by playing with blocks or little toys or whatever. It would teach them about the world because it was fun, and it wasn't formal learning. And I think that's part of what we miss at the moment within the business environment, often, particularly when it comes to technology, is it's sometimes seen as being kind of very rigid and very sort of scary technology, whereas actually we need to kind of reintroduce people to this sense of play and fun. But I loved your analogy with the playground because, you're right. The reason why we as parents feel comfortable letting our kids just run around there is everything's been safety checked. So someone's taken the risk out of that environment. That was a really good point there. And it's that same sort of thing we need to do in businesses. We need to give people that safe environment where they know they can play, where there's limited consequences for things to go wrong.
Exactly. And they'll fall off the zip line the first time they do it. But if that doesn't end up too catastrophic, as they've got a soft landing or they haven't created a $500 million Claude invoice at the end of the month, they'll go and get back on, and then they'll get better and better and better. And all of a sudden, we're talking less about the adoption, because this is a skill that the British workforce and the global workforce has built up that's hard coded, because we've had that ability with the almost the structure, the governance, and the safety net in place from our employers to go and make those mistakes and then learn again and then make them again and then learn, and eventually we'll all be kind of masters of that craft, really, and we get the adoption that we want to see, and we create the value that we want to see.
Yeah, I think the word mistake gets a really bad press. But again, thinking about it from a play and from a child's learning perspective, mistakes are just part of the learning process. We have to make those mistakes in order to learn. But I wanted to ask you, from what you've experienced and what you've seen, what are the most common mistakes? What are the most common learning mistakes that you've seen that organizations make when they're sort of approaching trying to understand this AI transformation and make themselves more productive?
The most common mistake I'm seeing at the moment is actually understanding what AI is and the history of it. I think there's people who aren't even aware necessarily of the concepts of machine learning and more kind of predictive analytics and everything like that. And that is still something that has it can create a huge advantage for organizations, and almost complements this more kind of new age agentic and knowledge worker based sort of search and return AI that I think actually a lot of people have this misconception that is what AI is. If you think back, companies used to kind of say data is the new oil, and organizations' data is unique to them. No one else has that. Not Anthropic, not Google, not anyone else. How their customers behave, how they operate internally. And that data can still tell so much of a story to an organization for them to use it as leverage. But the whole time that we're kind of just interacting with LLMs that are not hyper-tuned on our specific scenarios as a company, the more really we're kind of using AI as a generalist thing. So I would take AI as we know it, and I've seen companies do it. I would draw a much bigger circle and say there's more to this. Let's educate ourselves on the other things. Let's educate ourselves on machine learning and predictive analytics. Let's educate ourselves on sort of generative AI as well, and really kind of understand the stuff that's even on the periphery of that, such as data quality, data readiness, the governance, the difference between me logging into Claude with my just login details and actually adopting Claude through an enterprise platform that has governance and security posture around it, such as Google Cloud, for example. I'm going to say that because that's the one I work with. But all of the things that's going to benefit, not just the prompting of an LLM.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, and it's one of the biggest challenges which I think as an industry we face, which is people not really understanding what AI is. And you'll see me doing the little quotation marks when I say AI, because I think in a lot of businesses who are trying to adopt AI, they're often doing it out of fear, because someone's told them to do it, whether that be the board or the chief exec, or a competitor's got an AI, so they want one. And then there's this kind of rush to try and do it. And it often leads to the wrong outcome because they're not really thinking about the question and unpacking it. Like you suggested, actually, there's many tools within that broad AI basket that they should be looking at first. Some of them are less sexy than the big ones that everyone will have heard of, but it's critical to really understand that before you get started. So just as we look ahead to sort of what's coming next, I'd love to get your perspective on what are the trends that you're starting to see as you look ahead to the rest of this year and into 2027, that's going to change how you think businesses are able to leverage AI powered tools and services to transform their business.
I'm really excited about the innovation and sort of startup space in the UK at the moment. I think really, really have enjoyed being more in and around it. I traditionally came from more the enterprise space. So I think that will continue to thrive, and the UK are doing a really good job at just creating energy and vibe around that. I think there is a big thing in the technology space at the moment, which is commitment backlog, or RPO, remaining performance obligation. And there's been big commitments made to these hyperscalers. So I think it's going to be a really exciting period for businesses to understand how they're going to utilize these commitments, because they will be paying for those commitments to the Google Clouds, to the Databricks, to the Anthropics, regardless. So it's a big moment for companies to think, right, how do we get this right? So I think what will happen in the next 6 months is we're kind of getting to that stage where Anthropic are about to IPO. The token subsidy era is probably going to start reducing. There's the capacity point as well. Of course, token cost is going to go up, because if Anthropic or any other business doesn't have the capacity support to deliver against the demand at the moment, they're going to have to grow their revenues another way, which is of course increasing the cost of tokens. So all of those things are going to be happening, but I can imagine in the next 6 to 9 months, things will just start kind of settling back. And I think businesses will find their way into the flow of things. And there's a lot of great companies around to help support businesses to find their way with AI. I would always say to any business, you were here first, AI wasn't, and how you operate and what's important to you and your customers and your staff, AI should fit in to enable that to be better, not to be completely redesigned so as to sort of rip it up. So I think businesses will just find their way with kind of AI and what it means to them, and not feel the need to necessarily just jump on the hype train and dive in because the fear of missing out. I don't think there will be a missing out. The smart people will really kind of give it deep thought and think about it and figure out how it works for them. And that's not something you do overnight.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for that sort of view of the future and what's coming next there, Sam. That was really so interesting to see that perspective. And I think you're right, there are going to be some very large dynamics in the market as all of these large businesses approaching IPOs, thinking about their business model, the impact that's going to have. Is there a bubble going to burst? All of these kind of dynamics playing out. At the same time, in the UK, some of those businesses you mentioned, actually, they might be able to supply some of the solutions from small language models as well. So maybe that's the opportunity for them to come in as well. But just to wrap things up there, can you tell us how we can stay in touch with Fern AI and find out more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very active on LinkedIn. Our website, www.fernai.co.uk, has a lot of information about what we do, a bit about the kind of the market that we see. And yeah, we obviously kind of write quite a lot of thought leadership as well. We're presenting at the Evolve Silicon Brighton Forum on the 26th of June down in Brighton. Brighton's a wonderful city, but also kind of quite an innovative tech hub. So there's going to be 4,000 people at the Brighton Centre talking about kind of technology and innovations on the South Coast. And yeah, generally just get in touch with myself and our team if you want to maybe just, I'd call it path finding. If you want sort of help just finding your way with kind of AI, we work really collaboratively and embedded with our customers. It's deep discovery, but it's very tailored towards them and their business. And as you will know, because I've said it a lot, everything that we do is kind of grounded in value, really. We're not just looking for hype or vibe or the next shiny thing. We really want to kind of be able to map that lineage between sort of the investment and the value that you're going to receive. So yeah, hopefully I get to meet lots of people who need that support.
Amazing. Well, yeah. Well, thanks very much. I think that concept of a pathfinder is a really powerful one, because often people will find that they're being quite overwhelmed in this huge new world of technology and opportunities. And where do you get started, and how do you sort of guide yourself through that? We've talked about many of the methods which are critical to that, which is measuring the ROI and breaking that down into KPIs, and the process of doing that. But actually to have someone or an organization like yourself who can actually guide you through that, find the path through that, is also really critical. So that was a really good way of phrasing it. But yeah, we covered a lot of ground. Thanks very much for sharing all that value today, and good luck down in Brighton. I hope that goes well down at that the festival down there as well. But thanks for having thanks for being on the podcast today, Sam.
Thank you, Tim. It was great. Thanks for having me.
Don't miss the next episode. Subscribe now. UKAI is the trade association for businesses across the UK. Tech and non-tech, large and small. AI is our business. Find out more at ukai.co.